I guess a lot of it's automation and getting smarter with the systems you use as well. And as you say, there'll be a whole myriad of different things. It's really being able to explore it. I'm starting to see the 80-20 principle factor in quite heavily here as well with some of the things you're saying. Is that something you're conscious of and you work through as well with people?
It is, yeah. The 80-20 principle, in my experience, does hold true.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't do it as aggressively as we only focus on the 20% because there are some things that don't scale or some things that don't look like they add value, but that
right.
actually do add a huge amount of value. But often factors and variables that are linked in ways that aren't immediately clear.
Yeah.
Um, it's hard to see if you've not seen that before. So that's something that I usually bring as experience with my clients. I can see that
Mm,
these things that don't look linked are. So Pareto principle wise, we do look at the things that deliver the biggest return on investment for the time that you spend, and we do more of those. But importantly, we look at the things that you're spending a lot of time on that don't deliver an outsized return. And we say,
mm,
okay, why are we doing this? Does this make sense or not?
yeah.
Not necessarily just immediately cut it because every business is different, but we question and we seek to understand, does this make sense for you and your skills? Every
Mm,
entrepreneur is different. And for your situation, yes
understand.
or no? And then we make an adjustment based on that.
Welcome, team, to this live and I want to say exciting October 2024 episode where we're going to delve into the world of productivity and time optimization. Yes, today we're exploring the topic that I know is going to resonate with a large number of you, and we'll be chatting about the elusive skill, I want to call it a skill, of clawing back our days and even nights, perhaps shifting from a world of being time poor to one where you can be time rich and even have the freedom to consider optional activities like our guest, I'm sure, will share with you. We're going to be learning from the master. And John, I'm going to introduce John in a moment, but John's helped leaders around the world, just like you and I, find their power in managing time effectively and uncovering strategies to increase efficiency and focus on both personal and professional life. And also note that as we lean into productivity, that it's not only about doing more in less time, it's about making smarter, conscious decisions that lead to more meaningful outcomes. So with all that, sorry to keep you waiting, John. Let's welcome our guest to today's show. We're very happy to have you with us, John. Welcome to the ET Project, Mr. John Munn. John Dunn. Sorry, I have a
You're
question
fine.
for you. I
Yeah,
have a
thanks for
question.
having me. Hi, everybody. And yeah, thanks, Wayne. Glad to be here.
What's the JD? John J D Munn. That's why I said Dunn. I apologize. John J D Munn.
Yeah, so it's John J D Munn. The JD is actually there because, firstly, if you Google my name, somebody's got the exact same name. So I wanted to make sure it's searchable and it's only me. But
Right.
secondly, when I was growing up, everyone called me James. And I didn't get told my name was John until I was 12 years old. It's
Ah,
a quirk of my family history. So all my
wow.
friends call me James, but for business, I go by John. So yeah, it's John J D Munn because that's all my initials, my name together.
Excellent. Well, thanks for clearing that up, and apologies for miscalling you by your surname. I don't normally get into the personal elements straight away at the beginning, but I have to say I was really impressed by what you've experienced as well as achieved already in your life. And as everyone can see, if they're looking at the video, if you're only listening to us talking, you probably won't be able to tell so much, but John, you look fresh, you look young. So how long back did you get started on this whole journey? Like how long have you been doing this?
Yeah, so I've been running businesses since I was 15.
Mm,
So 15 years ago. The first ones were kind of small things. I was in a band, I managed bands, all that kind of thing. My first real business was when I was around 19 and I started a
wow,
brewery. I started the world's first brewery to do ancient alcohol. And I got some funding and I did that and it went really well. I ended up selling that business. I then started a social enterprise. It's kind of like a charity mixed with a business. that did digital education training at leading universities across the world. So
Mm.
we work with the University of Leeds, University of Oxford, universities in China and Germany and Italy, all over the place. We were across 7 countries. We work with Google and Lego and Facebook and a whole collection, the who's who, really, of
Right.
things. And I ran that for a while. And then I ended up transitioning out of that business, starting another social enterprise called Zero Smart, which I actually still run, which is an environmental social enterprise helping individuals and companies reduce their carbon footprint. That takes me around 4 hours a month to run that business, 4 hours per month. We have a team, we've got lots of automations and things that help it run really smoothly. So I have that still runs. And then because the way that when I was running Global Digital Week, the digital education one, I ended up getting burned out. So
Mm.
bad actually that I ended up vomiting blood.
Wow.
And it was a difficult time. It was very stressful running a company across 7 countries with more than 30 staff. It was difficult. And I changed the way that I did things and ended up reducing my work week very significantly, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah.
Um, but when people had seen that, they started asking me for advice. And they were friends or friends of friends, and I just started helping people to do what I had done. And eventually, referral after referral from all these people that I'd helped ended up getting to a point where it was, I need to decide if I'm in or if I'm out. And so I ended up deciding that I'm in. I really enjoyed it, and I realized I was making a big impact.
Hmm.
And that's how I ended up with this coaching business that I currently run as well.
Excellent.
So yeah, now my main thing really, it takes me around 12 hours a week. My main business now is helping people like you, like me, entrepreneurs,
Mm.
to reduce their work week, to work more productively and get their work week usually from 60, 70 hours a week, right down to 15, 20 hours a week without any loss of income, without any loss of profit. It's just making the business run more efficiently. So that's what I do now.
I can't wait to unpack that part of the discussion because I'm guilty as charged in the first case. So um, before we do that, though, you've mentioned several things there. I really want to touch on, if you don't mind, the brewery. So ancient beer. Where did the idea come from in the first place?
Yeah, this is always a popular one. People go, you started a brewery when you were 19, ancient alcohol? Cool. So actually started because I was at university and I started brewing my own alcohol because it was cheaper. I was a student, I just wanted to save money.
Mm.
And I ended up getting quite good, and people like my lecturers started placing orders with me in order to make things that I was just making for fun on the side.
Right.
And I got a bit of a reputation for it. And I found this recipe, which was an ancient Viking recipe called braggot, which is
Right.
kind of half mead, half red ale, half beer. So half mead, half beer. The beer is a red ale. Um, and I loved it. I thought it was the best alcoholic drink that I'd ever drank.
Right.
And I tried to buy it from other people, and I was like, this doesn't exist anywhere. Like, why is this not around? This is great.
Yeah.
Um, and I was really into history. I had wanted to study history at university, but ended up picking management and marketing for the career prospects, ironically. Um, and yeah, I just thought this drink should exist, braggot should exist. And so I looked into it and decided no one's doing it, so I'm going to do it. So I started a brewery that firstly started by making braggot, which was an ancient alcoholic drink, and then we made mead and we did other things.
Mm.
And we made the recipes historically accurate. So we were looking at mass spectrometry of pottery and things like that in order to work backwards from the molecules at the left, so and historical records, and
Right.
then recreate the recipe of what it would have been like. So that's how that started. The university funded it and helped fund it, and I had some money from my previous businesses as well.
Mm.
And yeah, started a brewery. It was great.
And what's it taste like?
Oh, it's a bit like a red ale.
Yeah.
Braggot is. It's a bit like a red ale made with Scotch yeast. So it's got a
Wow.
kind of a spicy kick behind it, I guess. But then the mead isn't an extremely sweet mead. It's more of a dry mead. that's in there
Okay.
mixed with it. So it's not like a very sweet red ale, but
Yeah.
it's a red ale with like a honey caramelly undertone, I guess.
Did any survive? Do you still have?
I did keep a couple of bottles, yeah. Um,
Special occasion.
but yeah, special occasions, I guess. But yeah, we sold it in shops around the UK and things like that. So
Okay.
there might still be some other ones out there.
Yeah,
But if
yeah.
you Google Relic Brewery, there's a brewery in the US called Relic Brewing. But if you
Right.
Google Relic Brewery, you can see one of the bottles of my mead on Google Images.
Ah, very
Um,
nice.
it's like a black label. It's a nice label. Um,
So you transitioned from the brewery into education. So,
yeah.
what was that shift? Like, how did that come about?
Yeah, that came about similarly with the brewery. I started the brewery because something that I thought should exist didn't exist.
Right.
I started the education business for a similar reason. I was frustrated with my own university experience.
Yeah.
I did a marketing degree, and we were talking about newspaper marketing and television advertising, but we very rarely spoke about social media, and social media was
Mm,
such a big and up and coming thing at the time,
right.
15 years, 10 years ago. And it was frustrating that we were learning things that felt out of date and that we weren't learning the practical application of them. It's useful to have
Mm,
the theory, I understand that. But when companies that I'd spoken to, because I was in the business space at the time, they were frustrated that the new graduates were coming in and they'd have to train them for a year or 2 years before they could actually do any marketing because they'd never seen the tools before. And so I was frustrated by that. And I thought, well, the companies want to go into universities and meet the students and find the top talent. And they also want people that have got practical skills. They can actually
mm,
implement what they've learned. The universities want more links with the companies, and the students want to have better education and to meet the companies that are going to hire them.
yeah.
So I decided to bring the three together, and we started an event called Global Digital Week. We ran across 7 countries, and we did practical, future focused, but practical skills training that the companies themselves facilitated. So the companies brought in their own trainers and trained them on the technology they were using. And the university provided the venue space, etc., and the students, realistically. I did
Mm,
the advertising in order to get the students to get there. But yeah, we did lots of different things. We did digital marketing training, so how to actually run a Facebook ads campaign, and we give the
right.
students a real budget and things like that. But
Yeah.
we also did haptic surgery, for example, so like robot assisted surgery for medical students so that they could get used to the technology that was being used today. But it was a big range of things. So yeah, it was about showing students the modern technology and helping them get hands-on with it.
What I'm curious about, John, is where did you get the approach to go out and approach these organizations, these companies? I guess the marketing um, university training you did was beneficial in that regard. But where did you get the wherewithal and the understanding about going out and approaching universities?
I think partially from running businesses before,
Right.
um, especially in like band management, you have to get the gig, you have to
Yeah.
go and approach people. But I think more importantly, just having a good offer. And that's part of what I do now, where I've been coaching for 6 years, and a big part of that is helping people create a great offer and making sure my
Mm,
offer is great as well. And I find that when you've got a good offer, it's quite easy to sell it. You just need to make people aware that this thing exists.
right.
And so with Global Digital Week, that's what I focused on, making it a slam dunk offer, easy win for everybody involved, and then just making them aware that it exists. So I did things like I found the phone number and email address of the vice president of Google, I for the chairman of the Bank of England, for um, the European head of Facebook at the time, etc. I put in the legwork and I contacted them,
Wow.
and they were impressed that I managed to find that stuff. At the time, I used an extension called Hunter.io, which still exists. It's not quite as
Yes.
good as it used to be, but it still exists.
Yes.
Um, And I put in the legwork and they were impressed that I found them. And then when they heard the offer, they were like, yeah, of course, this is an easy win. So that's kind of where that came from.
Fortune favors the brave, right? I mean, many
Yeah,
people
absolutely.
would say, "Oh gosh, I don't have the confidence to go out and approach somebody at that level, particularly when you're so young. I mean, you were very young at that point."
Yeah, and that can be its own positive. Like being young can be, people like
Yeah.
helping younger people. But I think part of that is something that I often tell businesses that are just starting that I work with is in the early stages, you have to do things that don't scale, in
Mm.
my opinion. So contacting those people took me time and it took a lot of energy and effort and it
Right.
wouldn't scale. I couldn't do that at scale to all these leaders. But I focused on the ones that I thought were easy, like easier
Mhm.
wins. And I did the thing that didn't scale in order to get that initial momentum and move it forward. And I see with the businesses that I work with now, this still holds true. We always start with warm outreach. So friends, family,
Yes.
connections in some way. But those first early stages, the first 6 months, you do things that don't scale because it
Yeah.
creates a momentum and a knowledge that is then useful for everything else. And it's
Mm.
counterintuitive that you do something that you know doesn't scale later on, but you do it for a good reason.
Right. Right. You mentioned there was a point where you felt burnt out in this global week. Was there a tipping point, like a specific moment that you said, "Gosh, I just can't keep going"?
It wasn't so much that I can't keep going. I think I was blinded myself. Like I felt, and I think a lot of people feel like this of, I just need to push through. I just need to get
Mm.
through this moment. And even
Yeah.
at that time, um, I was throwing up blood from the stress. And at that time, I still felt like, oh, this will pass. And
Yeah.
I'll keep going and I do this. The turning point, I wouldn't say there was a tipping point because I think I would have continued.
Mm.
But the turning point for me was seeing a 2 minute long video about jelly beans, where this guy has a mountain of jelly beans, basically. And each jelly bean represents one day. And he separates them and says, okay, this is the time that you're going to spend at work. This is the time you spend asleep, etc. And all these jelly beans move across and he gets rid of them. And he's like, this tiny little bit that you've got left, that's the time that you've got to spend doing what you want. Okay. And
Mm.
it's like hardly anything compared to the rest of the jelly beans. And he's like, here's the time you're going to spend with your parents before they die. And at the end of the video, it's what are you going to do with your time?
Yeah.
And I saw that and I just thought to myself, I have even less than that tiny little mountain because the way that I'm working at the minute. And I calculated how many times I was going to see my mum again before she'd pass away, based on how many times I'd seen her on average over the last 5 years, and how many years she's likely to live based on her life expectancy, the average life
Mm.
expectancy. And I was going to see her less than 20 times before she died.
Wow.
And I hadn't been appreciating that before. And less than 20 times that I was going to see her. For me, that really struck a chord where I just thought that's not acceptable to me. It's not something that I can continue with. And I said to myself, well, I'm going to change it then.
Right.
Here's a problem, and I'm gonna solve it. So I
And
changed the way that I did things
sorry.
and
Yeah.
reduced my own work week, so that then I could spend the time how I wanted to rather than working. And the byproduct is the stress and everything went down.
Hmm.
But I think for me, the primary driver of that change was not necessarily that I wanted to work less or that I wanted to be healthier. It's that I wanted to actually spend time with the people that I loved.
Mm. The video, by the way, for everyone listening, fantastic video. If you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube. We'll put a link in the show notes for everyone to go to. But really, you did a great job describing it, John. It really is eye-opening. It's it's that epiphany that you are here for a limited period of time, and a portion is consumed by sleep, a portion is consumed by all the different factors of living, And when you boil it all down, you don't have much time left. You say that you sort of pull back. I can imagine though, based on you at this stage, you're a go-go guy, right? You're very busy, you're very active, you're involved. There must have been some challenges in pulling back from this.
Yeah. I still feel like I am a go-go guy with
Yeah,
things, but I don't go only in work things that don't make sense.
right.
So I think the biggest challenge for me was understanding where my time was spent, because
Mm-hmm.
I realized I was working 70 hours a week. At least it felt like I was working 70 hours a week.
Yes.
But what I estimated I was spending that time on was completely different to what I was actually spending that time on when I started to measure it.
Mm.
And I think that measuring it is the most important first step.
Yeah.
Is if you don't have time, well, if you can't solve a problem until you know that you have a problem and you know what's causing it.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the first thing was figuring out, okay, well, where's my time going? You
Yeah.
know, I can't reduce the amount of time until I know where it's going in the first place. So that's what I did. And one of the biggest challenges was measuring that reasonably accurately. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you need to have a good picture. And then understanding, okay, which things here are actually worth my time, which things here create leverage, which things that I'm doing justify the time to impact, you know? And that took a while to figure out with things.
I can
Um,
imagine. Yeah.
yeah, but when you know that, it becomes quite easy to cut the amount of time that you work. An
Mm-hmm.
example, I had a new client about 10 days ago, just over a week ago. And she was in a similar position to what I was 6 years ago when I first started coaching. And she runs a SaaS business, a software as a service business.
Yeah.
And she's doing well. She's doing 40, 50K a month revenue. But she had no time. And she felt
Mm.
burned out and overwhelmed by all the decisions and all the work. And we were talking, it was a 1 hour call, and said, okay, well, what are you spending your time on here and here? And we delved into her situation. And it turned out that of that 50,000, about 40,000 of it was from her SaaS business. Okay, was from the main SaaS business. About 10,000 of it was from her consulting work that she was doing alongside the SaaS business. And the consulting work was taking about 60% of her week. And for me, that was an obvious, why are you doing this consulting work? Like, you've
Mm.
got too many clients for the SaaS business already.
Yeah.
And it's taking so much of your time that you can't actually work on the thing that's more profitable. And I think for her, she hadn't seen it that way. So she saw, hey, I'm getting 10,000. This is great. And when you're making money, it's very hard to turn it down.
Yeah.
But from an external point of view, I could see that this thing doesn't make sense in context of the other things.
Mm.
So even though we're going to be turning money away, because you've got an extra, it was almost 30 hours a week, because you've got an extra 30 hours a week here, we can spend that time building that SaaS business. And even if you get one extra client, that
Yeah.
more than accounts for all that time, and it takes you hardly any extra time to deliver for that client.
Yeah.
And so for her, she was too close to the problem and it was difficult to see. But from an
Absolutely.
external perspective,
Yeah.
it's, hey, it's this thing, let's do this. It's easy. There were other
Mm.
things as well that we work with, but that consultant, changing that consultant, she got rid of it the next day. Immediate change, saved her 25 hours that following week. You know, it's complete overhaul. And if I had said to her, I'm going to save you 25 hours after a 1 hour phone call, she wouldn't have believed me.
Mm.
Sometimes I have to reduce the expectations for people in order to get them on the call in the first place to make it believable because they just don't think they can save 30 hours after a 1 hour call.
I'm sitting here thinking to myself, how would I save 30 hours? We may have to talk, John.
It's different for every business. So everyone's in a unique situation. And with her, it was
Absolutely.
the easy thing with the consulting. With
Yeah.
other people, I had an e-commerce guy, Benoit, and it was a case of we introduced a third-party logistics company because he was doing
Yep.
his own packing.
Yeah.
It's different every business. Some
Yeah.
people it's let's stop marketing here. Other people it's let's start doing this instead.
I guess a lot of it's automation and getting smarter with the systems you use as well. And as you say, there'll be a whole myriad of different things. It's really being able to explore it. I'm starting to see the 80-20 principle factor in quite heavily here as well with some of the things you're saying. Is that something you're conscious of and you work through as well with people?
It is, yeah. The 80-20 principle in my experience does hold true.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't do it as aggressively as we only focus on the 20% because there are some things that don't scale or some things that don't look like they add value, but that
right.
actually do add a huge amount of value. But often factors and variables that are linked in ways that aren't immediately clear.
Yeah.
It's hard to see if you've not seen that before. So that's something that I usually bring as experience with my clients. I can see that
Mm,
these things that don't look linked are. So Pareto principle wise, we do look at the things that deliver the biggest return on investment for the time that you spend, and we do more of those. But importantly, we look at the things that you're spending a lot of time on that don't deliver an outsized return. And we say,
mm,
okay, why are we doing this? Does this make sense or not?
yeah.
Not necessarily just immediately cut it because every business is different, but we question and we seek to understand, does this make sense for you and your skills? Every
Mm,
entrepreneur is different, and for your situation, yes
understand.
or no, and then we make an adjustment based on that.
How did you stumble onto this in the first place? Did you have any early influences or role models that provided you inspiration or gave you guidance?
Um, I spent a lot of time, I was running my own business, but I spent a lot of time reading about it, taking courses. I spent a lot of money on courses, all
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. And the 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss was a big influence for me early on. And it was one of these things of I'd seen all these different influencers and authors and people talking
Yeah,
about productivity. And it always seemed like they were just trying to stuff more into a package.
yeah,
And at some point, the seams will burst. And that's the person burning out, becoming overwhelmed. And it seemed that everybody was talking about it from a perspective of doing more in less time. And Tim Ferriss was probably the first person I'd read who looked at it from a perspective of doing less
yes.
within that time, but getting a bigger result from it. And I think that was a big influence in the way that I approach things, where I said, okay, all these productivity principles, they all look great. Let's figure out which ones work and in what
Mm,
context they work, because not everything works for everybody. It's
yeah,
in different situations. But then, okay, how can we use that to not do more in the time that we have, but to do less in the time that we have, but achieve more in the little time? So that was a
mm,
big change of perspective. So yeah, Tim Ferriss' 4 Hour Work Week was probably the first major influence there.
okay. So you're at that point, you've done your evaluation of your time, you've identified that there's a lot of stuff you're doing that doesn't really bring much value. How do you then go about reprioritizing your time and then saying, well, gosh, now I have all this available time. What am I going to do with it? So, I mean, like you hear a lot of stories about people who retire and they die within 2 years because they don't have anything to do anymore. Like, what do you do? Where do you go once you have made this startling discovery that you're doing unnecessary things and now you've got all this time?
Yeah, I get this question surprisingly often. Yeah, it always shocks me. Um, I think there are two major things here. Firstly, when we reduce the time, if you just cut time, you're going to find that you end up with a big void, a black
Mm,
hole
mm,
in the time that you spend in your schedule. And usually, what people do when there's a big black hole in your schedule, they fill it with junk.
yep.
And so they put things in there like scrolling on social media. A lot of the time we scroll because we have some time free and we don't know what to do with it instead.
Mm,
And the
mm,
easiest thing is to scroll or to watch TV or to do something like that. That happens when we're not being intentional with
yep.
our time. We're just doing whatever happens because we're scared of having that time. And so we fill it with something, and usually we fill it with junk. That's the first thing. The second thing is when you start working more efficiently and you start realizing you've got more time, you've got two options. You can fill that time with more work and doing the work that matters. And for some of my clients, that's what they do, and it works fantastically. They grow twice as quick because they're working the 60 hours a week that they used to work, but they're more relaxed and happier because they're doing tasks that they find fulfilling, and they see the results quicker because they're doing the stuff that makes sense. The other thing you can do is what I prefer to do, which is actually enjoy your life. So I work less, but I do things that I enjoy, but I'm intentional about it. That's the big important thing here, where I have analyzed what I enjoy, I've analyzed what works, I've made a distinction between what helps me feel relaxed, what helps me feel rejuvenated, so re-energized, and I have hobbies. I play guitar, I play modern board games, I learn to sing, I do loads of different things. I travel a lot, and I'm intentional about my time. So that amount of time that I've saved, I've not left it to be a void, a big black hole to be filled with junk. I look ahead and I plan things and I put things in the calendar, in the schedule of I'm doing this at this time, or I'm seeing this person then. I like having virtual assistants that do that kind of thing for me. You teach them the things you like and you say, look, sort out, I don't want a gap here or a gap there or whatever. Like, figure out a date for me to have with my partner on Friday or something. They do that. It's great. But I'm intentional about how I fill it instead.
You mentioned VAs, and I'm sure a lot of people listening who are solo entrepreneurs are at that precipice where they want the VA, but they're not sure about taking the leap. They're hesitant about the cost. Any advice in that particular area?
Yeah. So with VAs, I always recommend that people to do that bit last in terms of, I use an acronym, ESAD. So eliminate, simplify, automate, delegate. Delegate comes last. That's what a VA does. You do it last because if you do it too soon, you end up making life much more complicated. If you don't clean a system before you add people into it, you just multiply the complexity and it makes life worse.
Right.
When you do get to a point of hiring a VA, I like starting small and fractional with things and then building it up from there. One of my clients, you mentioned cost. The cost can vary wildly. If you want a top-notch VA that's doing things very professionally, they've got a great background and they're going to be full-time, a support shepherd is great. It's a website and they hire basically the top VAs in the world for you. There's a small finder's fee, but it's worth it. Okay.
Right.
I think they changed their name recently, but I'm sure if you Google support shepherd, you'll find it. If you're willing or you want to start smaller, so for example, scheduling your personal time now that you've got more time, or getting your groceries delivered automatically for you, or whatever it is, or doing repetitive business tasks that can't be automated, then we usually start with onlinejobs.ph, which is a job website in the Philippines. But you can get very wide ranges and skill of VAs, but the majority of them are very good. One of my clients hired a VA last month. She's paying $200 a month for it. It's only fractional, so that person's only doing a few hours a week. But it's a good way for her to dip her toe in and learn how to work with a VA and learn those methods and get that right, but also to start developing that up with that person. So you can do it as cheaply as $200 to dip your toe in. In my opinion, the earlier you can get to a point where you can learn how to manage and work with somebody, the better. You said right at the start of this podcast that saving time is a skill. And I think that it is. It's a skill that most people aren't very good at in the early stages, but it is something you learn. You learn how to be more efficient. You learn how to manage a team. You learn how to hire and do all these things. And you can get better. So I think the earlier you start, the better you'll get quicker.
I think that's great advice, though, what you're talking about, the ESAD. I've heard a lot of negative stories about jumping in too quick and getting a VA, and they spend as much time, if not more, trying to, sort things and support the VA and get them up and running, etc. And they burn through a lot of money.
Yeah.
Not because the VA is expensive, but because they're so unorganized and they're not ready for that step. So I think your acronym is very nice. I might use it in the future if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine with me. Yeah.
You also talked earlier about a business that you and your partner have with Zero Smart. Could you just introduce that a little bit more, please? And we'll talk on a couple of topics about that in a moment.
Okay, yeah. Zero Smart doesn't have anything to do with the productivity side. It's an environmental social enterprise. So it helps individuals and companies reduce their carbon footprint. There's an element of tree planting, but also funding scientific projects, wind farms, solar farms, etc. That are all accredited. So we check all the scientific papers. They're all stamped and sealed and independently checked that they're actually doing what they say they do by the UN, or other accredited bodies similar to the UN as well. So the way that it kind of works is we've got customers that pay subscriptions or one-off fees to us. And it depends what they do, if it's a wedding or if it's a lifetime subscription or whatever it is. And we bring this together, and then we use this big pot of money to buy outsized return projects. So okay, let's take a step back. If you have $100, £100, whatever it is, you can't buy much impact because you don't have the economy of scale. You've only got £100. Nobody cares. Yeah, you can buy 2 or 3 trees. Whereas if you've got $100,000 or £100,000, now you've got an economy of scale here. Now serious suppliers can talk to you and you can buy something that has a very outsized return. Yeah. So with $100, you might only be able to remove 10 tons, but with $100,000, you might be able to remove 10 million tons. And so the scale is different. So what Zero Smart does is it collates the money, brings it all together, and then buys those outsized return projects with the economy of scale that it has.
What first got you involved or interested to go down this path? I mean, it's maybe a connection somewhere between the education, but it's still a divergence from the other things you've done previously. So what was the trigger for you to start working in this area?
The same as the other two. It was, I had a problem and nobody else was solving it to a point where I was happy. So I decided I was going to solve it. I wanted to be able to reduce my own carbon footprint, and it was a difficult, very obscure thing. It's very difficult to find scientific papers you could trust or projects that you could trust. And it felt that an average person wouldn't be able to do this. And so I wanted to be able to do it myself. The easiest way to do that was to set up a company and have that scale to do it for myself. But I realized that other people would be in my situation as well. So I wanted to make it easier for companies, easier for people. So one of the big things with Zero Smart is carbon calculators are not very accurate. Okay. Yes. If you take 3 different carbon calculators, they'll give you 3 different results for what your footprint is. With Zero Smart, we wanted to make it simple for people and more accurate. So rather than relying on an unreliable carbon calculator result, we take the average for the person in your country. Right. We go above that average, and then we reduce by that amount, in order to take the carbon amount into account. With companies as well, we've got set amounts that we do in order to make it easy for you. You don't have to spend $25,000 figuring out scope 3 emissions or hire somebody that specializes in that. Our entire thing is, we know that stuff, we make it simple for you. You just do this. It's a simple process. So that's why
my apologies, please go on.
No, go on.
I was just going to say, why would somebody like me be interested in coming and talking with you about it, what would my typical aim be in chatting with you and getting involved?
Yeah, one of two things. You either want to reduce your carbon footprint because you believe in the environmental cause and you feel that you should do your bit for the environment. You want to
Right.
do something better in that regard. Um, that's probably about maybe 70 or 80% of our customers feel that way. They just want to do more,
Mm.
and we make it easy for them to do more and to have an outsized return. The other 20% of people are usually companies, and they need to hit their net zero targets either for funding or legal reasons, or because they recognize that it is a USP. So people are more likely to buy from a company that's environmentally friendly. There's loads of studies that back that up. I can send those across. People like companies that do things for the environment. And so about 20% of our customers are companies that say, hey, we should do more for the environment, not because they care about the environment, but because they realize it's good for business. And it's becoming a legal requirement in many countries as well.
Mm.
And so they work with us because we keep it simple in order for them to get that competitive advantage. And that's okay. There's no shame in that. You're still
Yeah,
doing something good, but it should
for
benefit
sure.
you. It should be good for you as well.
For sure. I actually read a little bit of a disturbing article last week, I think it was, talking about a lot of the larger companies are starting to push back now on the ESG and the whole woke element of business. So I'm hopeful that the governments don't follow suit. So as you said, a lot of governments are bringing it in as a requirement, but yeah, we'll see where that goes. Hey, I have a activity we call rapid fire questions. I'm sure you've heard about that type of thing before, but I got 10 questions, and I wonder if you'd be game enough to see how quickly you can answer, and they're all business related. And
Yeah, I'm happy to give it a shot.
you can add the why to the answer if you choose. You don't have to. All right. So first one, what's your favorite type of business to work with, startup or established companies?
I prefer in the middle. My favorite kind of business is somebody that's going from being a solopreneur, so like a fresh start, into being an established business.
Mm,
What I call being self-employed to being a business owner. That's my favorite stage.
okay, perfect. If you could choose anywhere in the world, where would you, or where would your favorite place be to build a
Uh,
business?
to build a business is different to where I would live.
Yeah,
To where
yeah,
I would live, it's Valencia in Spain. I lived there for 2.5 years, and I think I'm going to be moving back at the end of the year as well.
nice spot. Yeah,
To live there forever. It's amazing. I love it. To build a business, or that's a more difficult question. I would, I haven't built businesses in lots of different countries before, so I'm biased here. But from my experience, having worked with companies from everywhere from Singapore to Lebanon to the US and Canada, I genuinely think the UK is one of the best places in the world to build a business. It costs about $15, £15, £12, give or take, to start the company legally.
right.
You can start in one day. The bureaucracy is easy. It's great. And there's loads of support. I'd probably pick the UK, best place to start a business, in my
All right.
experience.
If we broaden the scope a little bit, we talk about industry. Do you have a favorite industry that you like being involved in?
I like service businesses,
Mm-hmm.
primarily. That's more of a sector than an industry. But industry wise, I do like coaching and consulting businesses and agencies as well. They're all kind of similar. An
Yeah.
agency is more like a done for you consulting company, really.
Yes.
Um, I like that. They're fun, but I also really like working with businesses that I've not necessarily seen before. The fundamentals of every business work the same, in my experience, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there's little quirks for each industry. So Benoit, who I mentioned earlier, the e-commerce guy, he sells paragliding equipment. Now, I have never been paragliding. I didn't know anything about paragliding before, but I really enjoyed working with him
Mm.
because I'm learning about that kind of business. But we've dramatically reduced his work week, and he's making more money than ever before with it as well. So that was implementing the business fundamental principles and then adapting them to his situation. So yeah, I like working with coaching, consulting, and agencies, but I like it when it's something that I've not seen before.
If money wasn't a consideration, what type of business would you be in?
This one, coaching.
Hmm.
I'm in a fortunate position where money isn't a consideration. I'm doing this because I enjoy it.
Right.
I love meeting the different entrepreneurs. I love learning about the different kinds of business. I love solving that puzzle. It's really fun for me. So yeah, I love what I do. I'd choose this business every day.
You mentioned earlier the 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. Who's been the most influential person in shaping your business thinking?
Oh, um, I would probably stick with Tim Ferriss there. Not
Okay.
necessarily because he has been the person I've learned most from or anything like that with things, but because he came in at an earlier stage, he
Mm,
changed the trajectory and changed the way that I thought about things. And
right.
I think that's, as with most people, one of the earliest people you read normally has one of the biggest influences. And I
Mm,
think for me, I read him at the right time. And if I think about my life as a path, he's a whole different branch and the branch that
yeah.
I went down. So
Right.
huge influence there.
Yeah. Very good. Apart from the books and apart from Tim, I'm sure Tim will be listening to this episode. He'll be very happy. What's your favorite way to learn new things about business?
By doing, in
By
my
doing?
experience. So it's good to listen to um, more experienced people to ask questions. But I think the best way you learn is by experimenting with things,
Mm-hmm.
ideally with controlled variables. Because as listeners here, and you will understand, somebody might say, hey, this thing that I did is great, is fantastic, it's the best thing, you should definitely do it. And it did genuinely work for them. It was great for them. But when you do it, even if the exact same way you follow what they say absolutely perfectly, might not work for you.
Mm,
And it might just be that that person's got a different type of customer or different set of strengths. Some people are great at writing, some at talking, some at whatever. That person's different to you. That person's business is different to yours.
yeah.
And I think that you need to experiment a certain degree. Listen to experienced people. They can help you cut the corner, which is kind of what I do mostly, is just saying, hey, I've worked with your business before, or I know that this works or this doesn't, or I can see your strengths. Here's
Mm,
what you'd be good at. So listen to experienced people, but then experiment and try it and adapt. So by doing.
very good. I know you're into board games, but do you have a favorite business related board game?
I would controversially say that every board game teaches you something about business just because I love
Mhm.
board games. Catan is good for learning negotiation with other players. Terraforming Mars, one of my favorite games, teaches you about building an engine. So starting like slow and building things that create leverage later on. That's great for that kind of method. And Seven Wonders Duel, one of my favorite games as well. It's a two-player game, not Seven Wonders. Seven Wonders Duel. It's different. Um, Teaches you about forward planning, but
Mhm.
also playing the percentages in order to win. But I think every game has a lesson to teach you.
Very good. Last question, because there were some questions I had that were already answered previously in the discussion, but what's one business idea that you've always been fascinated by, regardless of feasibility, but you've never gone into?
Oh, that I've not gone into. Um, I've got a list of loads of business ideas on my phone, and I wish I could just bring that up and just scroll through and be like, oh yeah, this is good. This is good. Business idea that, okay, regardless of feasibility, if I just wanted to make boatloads of money, I
Yep.
do think space mining is going to make really, really good money. It's not particularly feasible at the minute, especially to do it profitably, and I don't really know that much about it.
Mm.
But that seems like the kind of thing that will make a big difference, um, economically at least.
All right. Very nice. Thank you for that. So we're in the last leg of our conversation now. I just wanted to sort of try and pull out some practical tips for our listeners if we can. Um, what would you offer the listeners if they want to try and improve their time management?
Yeah, two things, an easy and a hard option.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The hard option first, I think this is the one that makes the biggest difference, but people struggle with it. They struggle to commit to it. They struggle to do it. Is track your time. I use a free tool called Toggle. There's an app, there's a web extension. It's good. It's really easy. But just every time you start to do a task, you press like play and it records the amount of time that you're doing that task for. When you finish, you press stop. Easy. At the end of the week, you can then say, hey, I spent this much time on this. And then you say, was that worth it? Or this was less than I thought. This was more than I thought. Why? Was it less time than I thought because I hated doing it, so the time dragged? Was it more time than I thought because I enjoyed doing this, so I got into a flow state, etc.? Track your time. That's the hard one, but most impactful. The easy one, there's kind of two here. The easier one is to carve out 1 hour every morning to work on the business. Do not reply to customers. Do not reply to anything. No reactive things. Your customers won't care that you emailed them 1 hour later. It doesn't matter to them.
Yeah.
Okay, you still reply. You just reply 1 hour later.
Yeah.
But carving that 1 hour out to work on the business really makes a huge difference. It helps you firstly feel proactive for the rest of the day, feel like you've got something achieved and accomplished. But more importantly, it means you actually do something that moves the business a step forward. A lot of the time, entrepreneurs feel like they're working really hard, but not really moving anywhere. Often that's because they're just reacting all day, every day to what's happening, rather than being proactive and moving the business forward. So the easier option, just carve out 1 hour, 1 hour every day. Kill something that you think is not the most useful time. So stop posting on LinkedIn, for example, but instead carve that 1 hour in the morning. It makes a big difference.
Both are somehow related to establishing that discipline, right? Like even with Toggle, you still have to have the discipline to hit start and stop, and then use the tracking, etc. So yeah, very good. And let's say then somebody takes that advice and they identify that this busyness is not really leading to their desired outcomes. What would the next step be?
Firstly, on the discipline side that you mentioned,
Yeah,
it can take discipline, but there are ways to make it easier. Okay, there are ways to make it so it's a default rather than a discipline situation. Now, if you take your time and you realize, hey, this isn't working, I think firstly, we need to be really clear what those objectives are. But then we need to say, okay, why isn't it working? Is it not working because the process isn't quite right? And so we need to do the same thing, but in a slightly different way.
Yep.
Or is it because this thing that we're doing is fundamentally wrong, fundamentally not going to lead us to the outcome? And then, okay, what should we do about that? Can we remove that? What are the consequences of removing that? And if we do remove it, what do we replace it with? And I think that's one of the things that I help clients with a lot, is understanding, is this task worthwhile?
Yep.
If no, why is it not worthwhile? What could we do instead? Do we need to tweak it or do we need to get rid of it? And then what should we be doing instead in that time? That's one of the main things I help people with.
Very nice. If you look back and you were to look back, I don't know, 10 years to your earlier self, knowing what you know now about this whole process, what advice would you have offered to yourself at that time?
Yeah. Think more about the things that work would probably be the answer. When I started the brewery, I spent maybe 2 weeks full on doing the branding, the logo, the labels, all this kind of stuff. And those things are important, but there is a how important is it question to be had, I think there.
Yeah.
I think if I look back at myself before, the only advice that I think would make a really big difference is say, just ask yourself, was this worth it? Was this worthwhile? Like, is this the best use of your time? I think that one question unlocks such a big difference for every entrepreneur I've worked with, of just saying, this task that you did, you're working on the business, why? Like, why did you do this task and not that task?
Yep.
Was this task worth it?
So it comes back to what you said earlier about being intentional. Don't just get so caught up in the forest, inside the forest, that you don't really understand the intent of why you're there and what you're doing here. So
Yeah, 100%. Being intentional with your time, I think not just business wise, but personally as well.
right.
So when I'm off, being intentional with your time doesn't mean you have to be really alpha about it and fill it with all these great activities. Sometimes being intentional is I'm going to watch a film and do nothing, and
Yep.
that is my intention, is just to chill.
Yep.
But be intentional with it. Don't let life happen to you. Like, you have your own agency. You should be in control of what you do.
There's some great advice here, John. Thank you for that. I'm curious. You sound like you have the capacity to do more. Wondering what's on the horizon. Any upcoming projects or initiatives that you're thinking about or excited about?
Yeah, so within my own business, the capacity question's always there, in the sense of, like, I could take on more clients, I could work 40 hours a week and fine, but what would I be sacrificing in order to do that? And is it worth it to me?
Yep.
There's a balance there. If there's clients that I'm in a privileged position where I can choose who I work with. If there's a client I particularly like, great. Like, I'll take them on. If there's somebody that I don't, it's okay. I'll drop them, but I'll provide an alternative for them. I'll tell them where to go instead. I'm very big on making sure there's always a next step. If I'm not the right fit for somebody after they talk with me, I'm going to tell them who I think is the right fit and help them get there. So what would I do with that capacity? I think what I'm doing now, I love my life, man. Like, things are great. I travel, I have a business that I really enjoy. I like all of my clients. I don't spend any time on garbage tasks that I don't like, really. Yeah, I think I'll do more. Something that I want to do is, I'm a reasonably good guitar player, but I think I want to take it to the next stage. So I think what I'd do with more capacity is I'd hire I'd hire a guitar tutor and kind of take that up a notch. So probably not the answer you're looking for, but
Oh no, that's fine. I'm too envious though, so now I'm going to try and get some people to come and annoy you. Where can people come and find you and connect with you and try and create some havoc in your chilled life?
It's never havoc. I always enjoy it. You can find me at johnjdmunn.com. I'm sure that'll be in the show notes as well. You can find me on LinkedIn, John J D Munn. You can email me, john@johnjdmunn.com. I'm always happy to talk. I'm always happy to help and provide people with what I think the next step should be for them. I'm big on listening to people's situations to understand, and then recommending what I think is right. Even if that's not working with me, even if that's, hey, you don't need to work with me, you just need to do this. Or, hey, this other guy is a better fit for you, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always happy to point people in the right direction. So if you want to find me, johnjdmunn.com.
Well, it's certainly an incredible journey you've been on so far. You're only just really at the starting point. I have to say, I've been 3 times longer in the journey than you at the moment, and so I wish you all the best with it. Thank you for the great tips and suggestions, and yeah, well, thank you for being a guest, of course, on the ET project. It's been wonderful.
Thanks, Wayne. It's been a pleasure.
So what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so I can pop up in your feed occasionally with a great tip for your ultimate growth.